program.
Ouais, I'm good. Hello. 5 minutes. Still have time to enjoy your coffee. In 5 minutes' time, we start. It's almost 9. I don't know if you can hear me. Am I switched on? Yes, I am. Great, thank you. So it's almost 9. Thank you very much to each of you for being there this morning. It's a great pleasure to see you all and to welcome you. And thank you for the one who are online. We are about to start. So we are online on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I'm not sure if I forget anyone. And YouTube. Good. Thank you, Emmanuel. Okay. So good morning and welcome. Before we get started, it's important we acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wanda peoples. These lands are now home to many diverse First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Jérôme Leroy, and I'm VP North America, Building and Territories. I'd like to take a moment to introduce a special guest. The Consul General of France, Mr. Tudor Alexis, is joining us this morning. Thank you and welcome. Thank you, Tudor. Today, I'll start off this event by giving you some background before introducing our moderator, Chris Turner. We will get the speaking program underway. Many of my Nexans colleagues and myself just come from the Climate Week in New York, which is called the biggest climate event on Earth. We hosted live and online up to 1,000 people. We hosted a day at Climate Week on sustainable solutions for the energy transition with a special focus on offshore wind energy. Because Nexans, a French group, is the global leader to electrify the world with renewable energy. And as such, we are willing to be actively involved in dialogues about climate change, especially when it comes to electrification of the planet, which will require more renewable energies. Maybe some of you were there, but just in case, here are some of our key takeaways from New York. We are at the beginning of an electrical revolution that will involve the same amount of investment as all investment between 1950 and 1970 all over the world. The demand for electricity will grow by more than 20% due to the growth of the population. We also need to accelerate momentum on electrifying the world to get us closer to global carbon neutrality, as electrification is the fastest way to decarbonization. But we need to manage two challenges. One, speeding up the shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy. Second, the electrical grid is the backbone of any country's economy, but we have not been so close to massive power outages. Finally, access to copper is becoming an increasingly limited resource, so recycling is crucial. So the real question indeed is, are we going fast enough? We wanted to host this morning in Toronto, immediately after New York, to share some of the momentum and spirit of that event, but also to table what is relevant to Canada when it comes to sustainability through electrification. It's a conversation for all of us this morning. What we can do together collectively to work towards net zero and carbon neutrality. That is why we are calling this conversation Change the Current. You might say that we want this event to become a new reference in Canada. As you will see, our goal is to turn this gathering into an annual discussion to review our benchmark, check in with goals, and fine-tune our efforts through collaboration, new and existing. I know I don't have to tell you that it's here. So let me quote that inspiring statement. When I was young, I was wondering, what should I do to change the world? Now that I'm old, I'm asking myself, what do I do to change myself? Last year in BC, we saw forest fires, heat waves, massive flooding, and more human and animal tragedies. But these events are not happening in just Canada or Europe. Look at the recent flooding in Pakistan. There is a commonality in all these events, and it's because of globalization. Local warming is one part of it. So are value chains. Aluminium plants shutting down in Europe because of the electricity price going bonanza will undoubtedly affect Canada in the future. And here at home, copper supply must play more into the circular economy as a reusable resource. Between catastrophic weather events, geopolitical circumstances, raw material shortages, and growing demand for electricity, we are living in a volatile world. But the one aspect that affects us all is renewable electrical energy. In order to deliver that energy, electricity must be sustainably carried from energy production through to distribution, through to usage and the end customer. In other words, supply chain. My colleagues Olivier Chevreau will get into more details on this shortly. A few years ago, Nexans made a major philosophical shift. We made a carbon neutrality commitment for 2030 through sustainable electrification. Between now and then, the demand for electricity will increase by 20%. And as our CEO, Christopher Guérin, will tell you, electrification is the only way to achieve carbon neutrality. He says that new world of electrification must be safer, sustainable, renewable, decarbonized, and accessible to everyone. It's right there in our tagline, electrify the future. In many ways, our tagline acts as a kind of mission statement for our people. On a global level, we believe that electrifying the future should be everyone's mandate. Electricity is renewable. As a renewable energy through wind, solar, and hydroelectricity is an excellent way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. According to the Canadian Climate Institute, demand for electricity will grow by 2.1 times larger by 2050 compared to today. And to meet that demand, Canada electricity generation capacity will need to be 2.2 to 3.4 times bigger than it is today. Nexans has been providing land and subsea cable to supply electricity providers around the world for 120 years. We work with our suppliers and power utilities, and as such, we are proud to have played a large role in the electrification of the planet. Long before anyone understood the climate impacts on fossil fuels and other non-renewable resources. Nexans Canada has been providing cable at Niagara Falls for 110 years. Today, we supply cable in the CN Tower, the maritime links that enable Nova Scotia to import renewable energy from Newfoundland. And every day, we provide cable and solution for Canadian buildings and power utilities. We are a pure player of electrification. Our company's philosophical shift came about not because we were worried about the bottom line. It came about because our leadership and the 25,000 of employees who work at Nexans on 5 continents in 42 countries understood firsthand that climate change is not only here, but that we must do something about it. Everyone immediately understood what was at stake. Today, our company considers our social, economic, and environmental impact with everyday business decision we make. This is called E3, which stands for environment, engagement, and economics. But having said all of that, it's important to stress that this event is not about Nexans. It's about you. Many of you probably had not heard of Nexans until this event came up, which is why we are hosting this conversation. We first needed to gather thought leaders, industry authors, suppliers, media and climate change experts like you in this room and virtually, to meet one another, ask questions, and learn. Starting now, we have the opportunity to better understand how to take real climate action to achieve almost anything if we do it together. Looking at the government of Canada's commitment to meeting its 2030 and 2050 net zero goals, the economy will need to be powered by 2 equally important energy sources, clean power and clean fuels. Electrification, clean power, provides a near-term pathway for emissions reduction in many sectors, including transport and the built environment. Even in a scenario with ambitious electrification, it is estimated that 60% or more of national energy demand in 2050 could need to be met with clean fuel to be a net zero goal. Today, clean fuels make up less than 5% of total energy supply in Canada. There are also mega trends that come with electrification. The first mega trend is the grid. On a regional scale, the power grid is on average 45 years old, and there are concerns that even in a few years, that infrastructure may not be reliable as the transition to electricity ramps up. This will impact consumers, Canadians, who may be without power at a time during the cold winter month, and we may be forced to pay more as improvements are made. The second mega trend is the energy transition, moving from fossil fuel to renewable energy. I know our moderator will speak to fossil fuel and renewable energy. At our end, we participate to that new dynamic connecting offshore wind farms to the grid or solar farms to the network. The third mega trend are building renovations. One of our panelists today is from the City of Toronto and can tell us how the city plans to reach net zero emission by 2040 by eliminating the use of fossil fuel and by switching to cleaner energy sources such as electricity and other renewable energy sources. So Canada has some challenges of it, but we are a collective here. Today we have experts who will join on stage, and you out there, please ask thoughtful questions. My hope is that in 2 hours' time, new alliances and good answers will help us guide us into the future. Lastly, I should note that even though this conversation is taking place in Toronto, Ontario, we know that many of the issues and ideas here are easily scalable across cities and provinces across Canada. Think of this morning as inspiration and fodder for wherever and whoever you are. Let the idea flies. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Chris Turner. Chris is an expert on sustainability, climate change, clean tech, and the global energy transition. He is one of Canada's leading voices on climate change solution and the global energy transition. And he comes from Alberta, the oil and gas capital of Canada. Chris is writing on energy, climate, technology, and it has appeared in the New Yorker, The Guardian, the Globe and Mail, Maclean's, and many other publications. He has also won 10 national magazine awards, among other distinctions. Please welcome Chris Turner. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, thank you, Jerome, for the introduction. Thank you to Nexans Canada for the opportunity to join you all this morning and moderate this engaging discussion. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for taking some time out of your days to join us here. And thanks to everyone also on the live stream. We are intending to have a very lively conversation to include as much of your feedback and questions as we can. So let's get moving with it. As Jerome noted, I do live in Canada's oil and gas capital. I live in Calgary. What some might not know is Alberta is also Canada's renewable energy capital at this point, home to the largest share by far of new wind and solar developments in the country, including Canada's largest solar farm, which is due to come online any day now. I think it's intended this fall that it will be generating power to the Alberta grid. It's a 400 and some megawatt solar farm, much larger in scale than anything that's been attempted in the province previously. And the reason that's happening in Alberta is the reason why we're having this conversation today and why this conversation is so important. And that is that the clean options are not, anymore simply, an altruistic gesture toward the planet. They are the cheapest and most effective options for grids across this country and increasingly around the world. They are the future. They are the present even. And so it's my pleasure to be here with you all in Toronto today to moderate this forum on electrification and sustainability. These are topics close to my heart, and they are vital to Canada's future. And it's conversations like these that will help us build the better world that I describe in detail in my new book, How to Be a Climate Optimist. Now, climate optimist, those are two words we don't often use in such close proximity. And I understand there's often, sort of a reaction. How can you be, in the face of the extraordinary challenges we face, the kind of climate crisis we already see unfolding around the world? Where do you get optimism from? And where it comes from is that I've been following this climate solutions beat for almost 20 years, and that better world has never been closer at hand. Everything is happening faster, better, at larger scale than anyone would have predicted even 10 years ago. And in fact, if you want to go look up what the International Energy Agency thought was going to happen to renewables and what's actually happened over the past 10 years, it's an extraordinary juxtaposition and quite entertaining to boot. Now, before we get going with our speakers and panelists, I would like to set the stage with a few key points regarding clean electricity, which is our focus today, from my colleagues at the Canadian Climate Institute. I had the opportunity to work with them recently on a major study of electrification in Canada. And I'll just sort of go through the main takeaways from that report, sort of set the stage for our conversation this morning. First of all, the main conclusion from the report: clean electricity will power Canada's net zero transition. It is essential to that transition. Reaching Canada's climate targets requires a big switch from fossil fuel energy to clean electricity. This switch involves producing more clean electricity in every region, phasing out emitting sources, and using clean electricity to power more and more of the economy. This big switch is the foundation of Canada's climate progress, and it will power Canada's future prosperity. It is the essential piece of infrastructure that we need for this transition. And making that big switch requires governments to use policy tools, ideally coordinated across governments and around the country, to enable the transition. This is a tall order. It's a lot of work. No one has all the answers, and that's why we need to be having the conversations that we're having this morning, and many more like them. The term clean electricity, by the way, which is what's used in the Institute's report, is a good one to my mind, because it gets at the fact that we're not just talking about wind and solar. We're not just talking about sort of renewable power. In fact, Canada already gets more than 80% of its electricity from non-emitting sources. We don't think of ourselves as a renewable powerhouse because those non-emitting sources are predominantly hydropower and nuclear power. Still, that's a huge leg up. That's a massive asset that we have nationally as a country, entering into and accelerating this transition that we are already beginning from a very, very clean grid, if you think about it as a single asset nationwide. The other thing about clean electricity, I think, is it acknowledges that there's still some uncertainty as to how exactly we're going to get where we're going. And uncertainty, I think, is something we'll welcome in our conversation today. No one has all the answers here. And what I'm really keen to see is how the presentations that you hear this morning and the comments from some of the colleagues listening in, get that conversation moving and identify where some of those uncertainties lay. We know there are no definitive answers to these questions yet, and we know that this is going to be a very long process of solving the climate crisis. More than that, we know in Canada, despite the fact that we do have this great resource of the fact that we already have a lot of clean electricity in the country, we also have some very old grids in this country, sometimes a century old. We're dealing with some very old infrastructure that needs a lot of work, and hopefully we can come up with some ideas about some of that work this morning. Now, we only have 2 hours this morning, so we're referring to this conversation as dynamic, which in part means we'll try to keep it moving along pretty quickly. We've got a lot to pack in, and by the way, I should note this is all being recorded on video, so just be aware of that. Now, how we're going to organize the morning is like this. We have 3 speakers, each of whom are going to speak to one of the 3 core topics that we're discussing today: raw materials scarcity and the circular economy first, then carbon neutrality, and then renewable energy. After each presentation, which will be about 15 minutes in length, our panelists, who I'm going to invite up in just a second, will offer their comments and ask questions of the presenter. We'll limit that to about 10 minutes per topic, and then we'll turn it over to all of you here in the room, as well as those following along in live stream. All of you will be welcome to offer up questions for our panel. We'll have to keep that fairly short as well, just 2 or 3 questions for each topic. But I will note that there will be time for more informal chat after the presentation, as well as a Q&A for media off stage once we're all wrapped up. So finally, before we get going and bring up the presenters, I will tell you a couple of things about where we are right now, in case you're not familiar. If this is your first time coming to Evergreen Brickworks, it was chosen because of its exemplary sustainability features. You may know it was transformed from a collection of deteriorating heritage buildings, but now it is focused on creating a low-carbon future through community involvement. This building is part of what's known as the Center for Green Cities, which in 2014 received LEED's Platinum certification, their highest certification for a green building. And Evergreen Brickworks itself was named a geotourism hotspot by National Geographic for its efforts connecting city dwellers to nature. So that's where we're standing today. I'll also point out that the catering, which some of you have already enjoyed and can certainly enjoy more of as the morning goes on, is all locally sourced. The coffee's fair trade, and more details and all of that are available in the program at your seat. And while we're meeting here in Toronto, this is a national conversation, one that has implications certainly for the whole country. So hopefully lots of people are able to tune in via live stream from well outside the room here. One more thing I will note by way of housekeeping. If you are posting to social media, and we certainly welcome you to do so to spread the word about this conversation, our hashtag is #ChangeTheCurrent this morning. Please use it as much and as often as you would like to. And now let's get to this distinguished panel. Sitting up here with me already, as you know, is Jérôme Leroy. You've already met him. He's the Vice President North America for Buildings and Territories for Nexans. Coming up next, we have our first panelist, Duncan McClellan. Duncan is Duncan's a certified energy manager and project manager in Toronto's Environment and Climate Division, responsible for outreach and intake for all existing building programs. His insight helps provide sustainable paths forward for a variety of businesses and organizations across the city. We're looking forward to hearing from him, particularly about electrifying buildings, which are the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Toronto today. All right, our next panelist is Erin Andrews. Erin is Director of Sustainability and Circular Economy at SCP Consulting. She's a leader in the renewable energy space, specializing in identifying business solutions for companies looking to build sustainability into their business models. She has managed more than 30 initiatives to help businesses take action against climate change. And our next panelist this morning is Matthew McLaren. Matthew is an investigative reporter and data journalist at the Globe and Mail, and is part of their energy, natural resources, and environment team, specializing in complex, data-driven projects covering energy and environmental issues, particularly the electricity sector. He worked as a business journalist for many years prior to joining the Globe in 2015. Looking forward to hearing from you all once we get rolling here. And now I will bring up our fifth panelist, who is also our first speaker, and that is Olivier Chevreau. Olivier, there he is. Olivier, whoops. There he is. Olivier is Nexans Vice President Sustainability, where he deploys the company's E3 performance model, coordinating and delivering environmental and social roadmaps for the company. He joined Nexans Group 10 years ago as a consolidation director, then served as CFO of South America, later Africa and the Middle East, and finally CFO of the business group Building and Territories Southern. Like Jérôme, Olivier has also just come from Climate Week in New York, where Nexans hosted a full day dedicated to sustainability in the United States. So please help me welcome Olivier to the podium, where he will talk to us about our first topic, raw materials scarcity and the circular economy. Olivier.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Hello, everybody. Let's speak about copper. I think it's really important for you to understand how copper is critical for the energy transition. I think you all have in your pocket a mobile phone, correct? Do you have all one? Yes? In your mobile phone, you should know that there are 15 grams of copper in your mobile phone. So you can multiply this copper content by all the number here and on the net. And of course, in the world, to scale up at the world stage, you will see how copper is important for the digitalization, for connectivity. It's not only that, it will be also for the energy transition. Few figures first. Here you can see a bit the balance between supply and demand, who are producing, who are requesting copper, and what is the usage. What are the main takeaways? First, you have several continents which are able to produce copper. That's good. And we will focus, of course, on North America. But South America is quite important. We are speaking about 40% of the mix of copper in the world, with Chile and Peru. In terms of destination, this is clearly unbalanced, with a huge request from China. Of course, it has an impact, very important impact. In terms of usage, you can see how important the electrical sector is. So we want to promote electrification in order to contribute to carbon neutrality. This is great. We will need copper. And today, it's balanced, 22 million tons of copper, between supply and demand, but you will see that it will not be the case in the future. Of course, North America. We are here in Toronto, Ontario, and you can see that Canada is quite well positioned in terms of copper. In Canada, there are some copper mines. There is one important refinery in Montreal. As Nexans, we are lucky to have a rod mill, meaning a furnace close to this refinery in Montreal. So we are able to transform the copper completely. This is really important. This is not the case of the USA, where they are short of copper. They are consuming much more than they are producing. So I think this is a very good news for Canada. And of course, it will help Canada to make the energy transition. This is for the overview, but keep in mind that copper could be a blocking point for the energy transition. We all speak about EV, electrical vehicle, especially in Europe, a bit less today in North America. But we know that EV has a strong impact on the GHG emission. It can help to reduce by 90% the GHG emission. This is great. So, of course, to decarbonize the transportation, we need EV or hybrid vehicles. But it has an effect on copper also, because in an electrical vehicle, you have 200 to 300 pounds of copper. In a regular car, it's only 20 or 30. So you need 10 times more copper in an EV compared to a regular car. So it has a cost in terms of copper to switch from regular car to EV. This is the same also for solar, photovoltaic, and wind. In the wind turbine, you have something like 10,000 pounds of copper in a wind turbine. So, of course, if you have a wind farm, you have to multiply by the number of wind turbines you have. Again, it has a big impact on copper. Same thing for solar. We are speaking about 9,000 pounds, of copper in a solar farm, in a quite well-designed solar farms. So, okay, copper for EV, copper for solar farms, copper for wind farms. You can see how important the copper is for the energy transition. If we want to electrify, we need copper. It has an effect on the price. You can see on the chart, since decades, the copper price is increasing, but it is also showing a huge volatility. And this volatility, this increasing price will continue. Because it will continue, especially due to the fact that the situation will be more and more unbalanced. Today, we are quite balanced between supply and demand. This is great. But we are switching to EV, we are switching to solar, we are switching to wind. Of course, it will increase the demand. Today, the previsionists are speaking about 35 million tons of copper demand by 2030. 2030 is only in 8 years. When we speak with copper mines, as Nexans, we are lucky because we have rod mills. So we have the first transformation of copper. So we are in regular contact with copper mines. They are all saying that today they consider that they will be flat in terms of offer. Why? Because it takes much longer time to open a new mine. It takes today 8 years to open a new mine. It was only 2-3 years, few years ago. Additionally to that, the yield is less and less. They have to dig deeper in order to get the same level of copper than before. So, flat production, increasing demand. Of course, there is a big topic of scarcity that we should have in mind. We are facing a scarcity of copper, and more we are decarbonizing the world, more and more we will face this scarcity. So what is the solution? That's the issue, but what is the solution? One solution that we are proposing today is really the circular economy. Today, we are recycling really few the copper. For example, in Montreal, we are reusing 10% of copper scrap in the furnace. That's good, but the copper has a great properties. It can be reused indefinitely. The topic is the purity, how to improve the purity of copper. So, if we want to bridge a gap between the supply and the demand, we will have to increase the circular economy. in order to be able to reuse the copper and to rebuild conductors for the electrification. How to do that? The main challenge is what we call the urban mines. Today we know, and it was mentioned by Chris, that the grids in North America, the grids in Europe are quite old. They have to be renewed. We are seeing some blackouts in some big cities like New York, London. So by collecting all the cables from the grids and replacing them, we are able to recycle more. Same thing for what is in the grounds. You see some picture about emerging countries. It's easy. If you are going to South America, you just have to look up and you will see the number of cables above your head. And we know that only 30% are really used because they just add cable on the poles and not replacing what is at stake. So we are able to increase the recycling copper in the furnace. That's good, but we have to structure the downstream process in order to structure the collection of the old cables and the cable scrap. What does it mean? It means that we have to work together with the customer, with the end customer, in order to see how not only to sell products, but to recycle and reuse products. This is critical. And we estimate that it could bridge a gap by at least 50% of the gap between supply and demand. So it's really important, these urban mines. Jérôme mentioned the fact that in Nexans, we are thinking about E3, meaning this is our performance model that all managers have to follow. We have to bridge the gap between and to combine the economics, the engagement, and the environment. I think circular economy is a good example. It should be with a good financial payback, so economics. And of course, we are speaking about copper. Copper today is worth $8,000 per tons. So it's something that is really valuable. It has a value and we can benefit from it. Should be, for sure, financially positive. Should be environmentally positive. And circular economy is very good because we are limiting the impact on the virgin raw material. And on top of that, what the recycled copper is much more efficient in terms of GHG emission than the virgin one. So electrification is supporting the decarbonization, but the recycling copper is helping us also to reduce our GHG footprint. And last, engagement. Engagement means the engagement of the whole ecosystem. Here again, we need our supplier in order to promote some cathodes with recycling content. We need our customer to improve the collection of the urban mines and to request us some recycling content. So we are really engaging the whole value chain. That's why, for me, it's a real example of if we want a sustainable world, we have to combine economics, engagement, and environment. And circular economy is a great example, a great illustration of that. Thanks for the listening.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jérôme. Some excellent insights there on one particular piece of the cleantech economy, the resource of copper. This is something that I hear more and more about. Is that there are going to be potential resource crunches for all kinds of materials that will be an increasingly intense demand as we see the energy transition roll out globally. It's also the kind of thing sometimes you hear, particularly here in Ontario, framed as an enormous opportunity. Because Ontario specifically, Canada in general, has such abundant supplies of a lot of these resources. But that opens the question, obviously, how do we intend to develop these resources? How do we intend to square that with circular economy goals, with our climate goals generally? Panel, you've been listening to Olivier's talk. Sorry, I called you Jerome earlier. Who would like to get us started?
I have a
Duncan?
question. I have
Oh,
a
sorry.
question.
Matthew,
Well-
I'll let you jump in first then.
Well, Olivier, I mean, with prices being as high as they are, at 8,000 a pound, I think you said, and you can see that they've been very volatile for a long time. How come we're not recycling more copper in this country already? I mean, what is it? What are the big obstacles as they stand now that are preventing us? Because you'd think that a lot of, there would be people wanting to take advantage of that and recycling a lot more of the copper that we have now. So why isn't it happening?
Thank you for the question, Matt. I think as I mentioned, one big blocking point is the fact that today the market is not ready in order to recycle. The process really is not structured. So today we are recycling 10%. We can increase to 20% without any issue. But we have this issue of availability of copper scrap, of cable scrap, because really our customers are not used to collect the cable scrap, and us, we are not used to collect the copper scrap. So the blocking point for me is really to make sure that this today informal market, because very often it's a bit informal or gray economy, I would say, we have to structure it to formalize it. It will be the first topic. Second topic is regulation. Regulation are helping a lot. For example, in Europe, they are taking some regulation in order to push companies when there is a new building, a new civil work, whatever, to reuse all the material of the previous one. Of course, it will have an effect because we will have to structure us as a company in order to help this circular economy and this reuse. So, structure the market of recycling plus regulation would be my the two major pillars, I would say.
And this is something that we're seeing as well across all industries. So I focus mainly on PET plastics recycling, which is a much different game because the value of plastic is significantly lower than copper, but we call that reverse logistics in circular economy. So getting the material back, processing it effectively, and then getting it to where it needs to be is kind of where the whole economy aspect comes into it, because think of the potential businesses that could come to fruition because of needing those services and being able to resell that material for a lower price than opening 2 to 8 years to open a mine that are getting increasingly more expensive to extract from. But something else I did want to mention here is when we're talking about circular economy, it's really important to also consider the social aspect. So when we talk about mines that are being opened, what communities are being impacted by that? And so in these sustainability conversations, it is really important to recognize that either we do or we don't have Indigenous voices represented at the table, because those are the communities that are often impacted by extractive industry. So I think that where the cost 100% makes a lot of business sense, it's also really important to consider how we're being corporate citizens, right? And even legally in Canada, a corporation is meant to serve the communities beyond just shareholders. So I think there's both the social motivations to get this economy built, as well as the business motivations. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, especially in copper, because usually the biggest barrier is the fact that the material is low value. For example, in plastics, cardboard, all those typical like CPG type materials, but there's huge opportunity is what I'm saying in the electricity market, whether it's EVs, you can take the copper conversation and put that towards cobalt as well. Urban mining is happening. People are mining landfills for cobalt because the price has fluctuated and increased so greatly. So there are so many motivations to do this. So I just really appreciate that we're starting this conversation with the circular economy perspective, because it's often overlooked in electrification conversations.
Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Irina. And I think that's a great point to mention also that the PVC plastic is also a topic, especially in Canada, where there is a topic of regulation related to that. To reuse the plastic in a compound is not so easy in Canada and should be easier if we want really to be completely circular.
Yeah, and it's the procurement. Circular procurement is a huge aspect of that. So if we have buyers, people will make it happen. So.
Yeah, well, if I may, I think I'd like to jump on those two topics, because to me, I think we are here as a community, and today that's I think the meaning of us being together, thinking how we can change the current, how we can change our habits. And I like to quote two things. We deal with partner distributors to whom we are selling power cables, who then resell them to electricians.
And what we find out is that as an electrician going on site, installing cable, at the end of the day, you generate scraps, by definition. And those scraps today are not industrially, I would say, collected. No one is having a clear plan to make it, to have them collected back and recycled. We started with one of our platinum distributor partner. We started that process in order to make sure that none of those scraps, which are made of copper, but also plastics, are left somewhere in the countryside, which is what used to happen. And that is helping a lot to clean the ground and reuse a copper which can be recycled many, many times. So that's one example. The other example is when we are dealing with big power utilities, like in many regions of Canada, we also found out that once a job is done, we evaluate the percentage of untouched cable, whether because too much cable has been ordered or because scraps have been generated, up to 20% of the total value. And we are developing a new device called Yule Tracker to make sure that we know at any point where those cables are, so that we can organize with the support of the power utility the collection of those scraps. And I'm just mentioning those two ones because I think that it's really about acting together. To us as a manufacturer, we can do things, and we do a lot in our plants, like recycling PVC and things like that. But I think if we start thinking as the stakeholders of that industry, which is the electrical industry, we can do much more. And the two examples I have mentioned, I think, are two positive illustrations.
Yeah.
And I think probably an obvious spot where governments, regulation, could be a big piece of the puzzle too. Companies can certainly lead, but you really do need that push from government to make it, an industry standard and a regular practice. We have a few minutes still on this topic. Are there any questions here in the room? We do have a microphone that we can circulate to get your question, or if anything's come in off of the live stream, we do want to include questions from our crowd here. Anyone? Do we have anyone on the live stream? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so from the live stream, we had a question about copper recycling. Pretty much is pertaining to when you're recycling copper and using recycled copper in your products, does it reduce their technical properties? Does it mitigate or diminish any of the results that you would get from a brand new product using brand new copper?
So I understood the question was related to the technical properties. Yeah. So the good thing with copper is really it can be reused and reused and reused. You just have to melt it and to reuse it. The topic will be purity, of course. So when we are speaking about reusing and recycling, it should be a copper with high about mechanical, the ability to blow, and the electrical properties, of course, the conductivity. If you have a good purity, no issue. If you have a lower purity, you will not do the same application. It will not be cable, it would be something else. Could be, but the application will depend on the purity.
And then also just to follow up, how would you qualify the purity on your end? Is there a process kind of set in place?
How to qualify the purity? There are some analysis, chemical analysis to see the purity, and we should be at 98, 97%.
99.8.
98 exactly. So it's a high purity, for sure. For a cable, for really a conductor.
And I'd also like to just add something really quickly to that. This problem exists across materials as well, which is where the reverse logistics is so important, because you think of your municipal recycling bin, you just throw everything in there. It's a pain to sort. The purity goes down, which people probably know about. But if you have that clean collection up front, it makes it much easier to increase the purity of the material, whether you're talking copper or plastic.
And I mean, going the municipal recycling route, it seems like I should chime in on that. just a kind of a little bit more generalities. This is not necessarily my specialty. I'm in the building side, but we do have circular economy teams within the solid waste department, and also they liaise with our teams on those pieces. And I think the key part from what we've seen on the municipal side is messaging. Because whether or not you are on the industrial scale or it's just me at my house, necessarily knowing where you put things, what you do with it, knowing that there is copper, for example, in something and that's useful and that's something that we can do. How do we separate those streams? How do we get that messaging out? And at that collection point, figure out exactly what it is. I mean, it really blends into everything we do as a city, even on the existing buildings team. When we think about kind of the circular economy and how do we incorporate that into buildings, we look a lot more at embedded carbon, right? Like how do we reduce that in buildings? But that blends through to everything we do as a city, whether it be parking, whether it be kind of all these different pieces. It's a little more generalities than the specifics of copper, but I really like the kind of one specific item, and then how do you kind of push that to everything.
Mm-hmm. That actually is quite specific, because we're actually working with a client right now all about employee training and engagement. That's the biggest vector. They're actually a construction project management firm, and they're like, how do we get our contractors to actually do this, right? It's all through engagement, and like meaningful engagement too. Like bringing them into what are your barriers and what are the solutions that we can co-create to make it possible to increase the purity. So then we can sell it. So then we can rebuy it. Like it's a whole ecosystem.
Like how did we get to a point where every time we have a beer can, we take it back to the beer store, right? Because the amount of reuse that we get out of those pieces it's really high. Like that's really high. So how do we make that for all the other options? And that might be that's a municipal collection level, and it's especially different. Every municipality has different rules too, right? And I think that's the hard part in standardizing something like that.
Yeah, and that's where you get at the importance of these big principles as they trickle down. How are they communicated to people? We know, from the last 20 years of talking about climate solutions and addressing this problem, how much of the problem is getting people on board and staying on board. It's not just, we have the technology, we have the techniques or whatever else, but how do you get people to understand that this change is in a direction they want to go? And it's a huge piece of the puzzle, one we will not address further just right at the moment, because I should move on to our next speaker. So thank you very much, Olivier, and thank you, panel, for the first topic. We will now move on to Dr. Bruce Laurie, who will be talking to us about electrification and carbon neutrality. Bruce is a best-selling author, policy expert, social entrepreneur, and award-winning global sustainability leader. In addition to serving as president of the Ivy Foundation, he is a senior fellow of the Institute for Sustainable Finance and guest lecturer at the Oxford Social Finance Program. He's active on many boards, including the Canadian Climate Institute, Seed Change Foundation, and the Transition Accelerator, and formerly the Independent Electricity System Operator and Ontario Trillium Foundation. Bruce is best known for bringing collaborative solutions to major environmental challenges, such as phasing out coal and establishing the Ontario Greenbelt. He has been instrumental in the creation of over a dozen organizations that play critical roles in sustainability in Canada and beyond. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Bruce Laurie to the podium.
And it's my pleasure to have Chris Turner introduce me, one of Canada's great thinkers and authors on this subject. And thank you so much to the Nexans gang, Jérôme and Olivier. It was really a pleasure to have a conversation in advance. And I think one of the reasons perhaps that it feels like I'm where I should be today is I basically work on electrification mostly. I've been very active in trying to figure out how we solve climate change through electrification. And my first job ever was working in a copper mine. So a lot of connections here. So when we work, we as in the group of people that are connected largely through my work at the Ivy Foundation, work on how we transition to a net zero economy. We increasingly use this line, net zero changes everything. And what does that mean? And I will describe how I will describe that within the context right now of where Canada is at and where the world is at. So, as I'm sure you all know, we've committed as a country and as a world to trying to keep our global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. And the more informal target, but critical target, is 1.5 degrees. We are now at 1.1 degrees of warming globally. And I think even if we stopped all fossil fuel burning today, we would probably get pretty close to 1.5 degrees. So a pretty tough target. If we look at how Canada is doing against our peers in the G7, you'll see that we are actually not doing very well as a country. So if you look at the UK at a remarkable 43% reduction in emissions from 1990, the EU overall at 28% reduction, the Americans even essentially on track to stabilizing emissions, and then Canada at the very top, an increase in 21%. And of course, that's almost related exclusively to oil and gas production and export in the province that Chris comes from. Is it, Chris, is that you that caused that? Anyway, so we have a particular challenge in this country. And we have very much an east-west divide. Most of the oil and gas is produced in the west, and most of the major emission reductions. So if you look at Ontario, thanks to the coal phase-out throughout the late 90s and into the 2000s, Ontario actually looks more like the EU in terms of our emission reductions on this side of the country. So when we talk about net zero approaches to climate change, we're really talking about this great global economic and social transition. You heard reference to the Climate Institute report calling it the Great Switch. So whatever we're talking about, really, it is, a great transition, which, is going to be challenging, but also it's going to bring unprecedented economic opportunity. So massive investment required in infrastructure. A big part of that infrastructure investment will be related to electrification, electrifying building, heating, electrifying the transportation sector, building out and increasing the capabilities of the electricity grid. So a huge part of the solution to climate change. And essentially, if you think about the overall economy, whether it's transporting the products that we're buying every day, how we build buildings, how we retrofit buildings, how we generate and use energy, all of that will be changing dramatically over the next 20 to 30 years. And this is a long-term project. 2050 is I guess increasingly not looking that far away, but it's going to be a project that'll probably take us to 2100. So net zero is important phrasing, and it's not, I don't think, just semantics. For decades, we've had these debates around targets and timelines that have been, I think, somewhat frustrating and fruitless in terms of how do we get to our climate change goals. So I think net zero kind of bypasses that conversation. Most importantly for us, it takes us out of this kind of problem orientation into a solution orientation. And even, in our conversations this morning that I've had, the idea of how do you build out industrial supply chains that will make sure that we have the critical minerals and the materials that are needed for the transition, that we have the processing capability, that we have the distribution networks, and that people understand how all of those things are connected. And from our perspective in Canada, how do we make sure that we are building those competitive supply chains that are going to essentially plug into global supply chains, because Canada is a small country and we really need to figure out where we can pick up the most competitive opportunities. And frankly, that's not thinking that's going on, I would say, in a lot of the country, and we need to really be much more strategic about that. And then finally, I'll just say that everyone supports net zero, which is either a good thing or a bad thing. So when you've got the major oil companies around the world supporting net zero, they probably have a slightly different idea around how you get there. But I think the fact that everyone is talking about net zero means we can get into a room and have a conversation about what does net zero really look like. And a lot of the thinking that we're doing these days is around this concept of pathways. So what are the major pathways to net zero? And it's electrifying, most building heating. It's, electrifying a lot of steel making. It's, probably carbon capture and things like cement. It's hydrogen and long haul freight. So there's a lot of stuff going on out there. And I would say that one of the most important concepts as well around thinking about transition pathways is I would say that we have more certainty than uncertainty. So, Chris, you touched on the idea that there's still uncertainty out there, which clearly there is. But so often uncertainty has been used historically as a reason to not act. And we need to recognize that we actually have a fair bit of certainty. And this idea of electrify everything, which of course isn't everything, but I think electrify the future is probably a better phrase. My next presentation, you're going to see electrify the future, not electrify everything. I think that's a really good way of putting it, because the majority of anything right now that uses fossil fuel will likely be electrified. Not everything, but a lot of things. Air Canada just announced a purchase of the first fleet of electric airplanes, for example. I'm not going to volunteer to be on those for a little while yet, but we do see those in operation. I'm not going to run through all of these here, but number one, waste not, want not. In addition to making sure that we're electrifying, we actually have to use every single end use of energy more efficiently than we do today, and at about double the current efficiency. So if you think about, or if you look at all of the studies showing what the implications of electrification will be on grids, you see that not just grids, but the electricity system, typically you'll see reference to between 2 and 3 time expansion of existing electricity systems around the world. So doubling or tripling all of the existing electricity. And the way I look at that, we're likely going to need to triple it if we don't use end-use energy super efficiently. So if we use it efficiently, we might get away with doubling it. So the difference between doubling and tripling is going to be a massive, massive expense. That's going to be a cost that's going to be a burden for consumers and industry. So we can't underestimate the importance of efficiency. And then when we talk about electricity systems, of course, we're talking about smart grids, storage, heating, heat pumps. And I'm going to touch on in a minute this whole idea of looking at rethinking, especially in Canada, kind of the governance and administration of electricity systems, which may sound a little tedious, but I think it's the nut we need to crack in this country. So barriers to decarbonizing electricity. We heard Olivier on the sort of supply constraints with respect to copper. Very interesting to hear, and something where I think Canada really has an opportunity to play a significant role, not only for Canada, but in global supply chains. And whether it's materials, whether it's equipment, we hear about shortages of turbines and other equipment, or if you talk to people in the electricity industry today, or the HVAC industry, for example, they'll tell you that human resources are the #1 critical shortage today. So we need more trained workers to develop all of this expanded activity. Public acceptance for projects, large infrastructure projects, is a huge challenge. When I was on the board of the ISO here in Ontario, I used to joke that the only thing we could get built is a nuclear power plant because everyone opposes everything else. So whether it's a large wind farm, a large solar farm, a transmission line, we see massive public opposition. We're actually at the Ivy Foundation doing research to understand how better to engage communities, Indigenous communities or small towns across Ontario, so that they're not constantly opposing things. And one of the obvious ways to do that is to bring people in early on in projects and have them take a direct stake and a benefit in those projects, which we're doing. There's also significant industry resistance to electrification. One industry in particular, I won't mention them. And then when we look However, when we look at the broader electricity system decarbonization, I think it's pretty safe to say that there's international consensus on the fact that about 80% of our primary energy supply will come from clean electricity. I think, Olivier, you may have mentioned 50% or something by 2050. So that's probably a trajectory that we will be on. It's not going to happen all that quickly, but I think the greater the recognition that this is the trajectory that we are on today, and the more people that buy into that, I think the easier it will be to start to put in place the kind of mechanisms that get us there. I mentioned the 2 to 3-fold increase in electricity systems. And then fundamentally, I think what we're going to see is a change in the relationships around the electricity system. So this is everything from markets, market rules, regulatory structures, governance structures, and it's going to need a lot of sophisticated understanding and public engagement to get people behind the kind of change that we need. And quite frankly, right now, Canada is not set up to expand or develop efficiently our electricity systems because of our provincial, kind of broken up parochial provincial electricity governance in this country. And that's something I'd love to talk to everyone about at some point. We've got some ideas. I think, just some additional barriers to decarbonizing electricity. Affordability, I think, is going to be the big political battle for the next 5 years in this country. We're going to see everyone talk about every single aspect of affordability, and it's going to get complicated because, you know, one group is going to tell you that nuclear power is the most affordable, and another is going to tell you it's solar, and another is going to tell you it's wind, and it's going to just be frustrating. But it will be, I think, the battleground for the future of electricity. Awareness, critical. Of course, technology availability, we talked a little bit about. And then fundamentally, this is going to all be about kind of creating grid readiness for those end-use electricity demand increases that we're going to see from vehicles and buildings. So in simple terms, which I always like, I see us moving essentially from these old energy systems to new energy systems. So basically a fossil fuel-based economy to a clean electricity economy. And basically the conversation that we're having right now is, how quickly do we ramp down the old energy systems and how quickly do we ramp up the new energy systems? Because you can't have one moving faster than the other. They will always be in equilibrium. And I think it's critical that we look at, while we think about those new energy systems, how do we successfully ramp down kind of the existing fossil fuel economy in a way that won't be too distressing for people. And then finally, kind of making it all happen, I think we need a vision globally. I think we need a vision in this country for a future electrified, clean electricity economy. And the way I see it, there are internal actors and external actors. Internally really being the people that are working within the electricity sector, people that we have in the room here today. So that includes provincial utilities, electricity system planners. This is where I always love hearing private companies talk about the importance of regulation. I mean, regulation is going to be critical. We need to do it well. But fundamentally, electric utilities need to have net zero embedded in a regulatory way in all of their future planning. We basically don't even have utilities in this country understanding or building out plans, making plans for electricity expansion. We need to have technology and material suppliers coordinate themselves in these supply chain alliances that I was referring to. And then we need effective regional governance models so that rather than just having Ontario figure out the electricity for Ontario and BC for BC, we actually need to start the way, frankly, most of the rest of the world does it, is to have larger coordinated regional planning bodies that'll understand what the most effective way is to deliver electricity. And then externally, the business groups, public engagement, And then we also refer to this idea of how do you create investable opportunities for the finance industry so that they can start to understand the importance of electricity. So I am going to leave it right there, and thank you all very much, and look forward to your questions.
There we go. Thank you so much for that, Bruce. Always a pleasure to hear from you. You've got a very wide and deep view of the whole transition, and it's great to hear. I won't mount any kind of full-throated defense of the province of Alberta. I will mention, though, by way of saying that you can, as Bruce said, you can get a lot of people into the room when you talk about net zero, and much more so than you used to be able to. The oil and gas production emissions that Canada has are one thing. But notwithstanding that, if you're having a conversation in Alberta about net zero goals, about reducing emissions, the city of Calgary or the city of Edmonton is not hostile to that. They have their own goals. Alberta's in the process of phasing out coal from its grid and doing so ahead of schedule. Despite the hue and cry you might hear around oil and gas projects and pipelines and the rest of it, it's still an active conversation even in the oil and gas capital of Canada. So increasingly, a conversation everyone's having, and a conversation we are going to carry on regarding net zero and carbon neutrality right here. So I would mention, maybe Duncan, do you want to get us started? I would think that electrification and net zero is pretty big on your agenda, given how much buildings are responsible for emissions here in the city of Toronto.
Oh yeah, very responsible. So yeah, this city of Toronto, it's over 50% of the emissions come from the existing buildings within the city of Toronto. So clearly our team has kind of one of the biggest chunks to handle in that. The way that we've laid it out in the existing buildings emission strategy, which is part of our transform TO kind of overarching policy, is we've laid it out in a couple of ways. There's carrots, there's sticks, there's microphones. So microphone is the advocacy piece. It's talking to the provincial government. It's seeing where we have jurisdiction. It's seeing where we can kind of make sure that we get the messaging out. We've got carrots, so developing programs that help bring those pathways. One thing that was said that really got to me is that we do have some certainty in where to start some of these pathways to net zero. We can get along that pathway. We might not know the end of it at this point. To get to net zero on site with a building in the city of Toronto, not really economically feasible right now, but we can start people along those pathways so that when it happens and when those certainties come up, we're already halfway there, a quarter of a way there, whenever it ends up being. Also figuring out where those responsibilities lie within the municipal, the provincial, or the federal government. The coordination was a pretty key part. But what we're finding is cities, as also you said, they're willing to have that conversation because they're really connected with the people that are within their cities. So Calgary, Edmonton, they're willing to have that conversation. City of Toronto is willing to have that conversation with private companies, with other organizations, and take input in terms of how we develop these pieces and where we go from there. Another key part that we really respect from what you said was the efficiency upgrades that are needed. We've done the modeling and we've presented it to Toronto Hydro and the ISO about where we see our electrical demand going, because we do need to electrify buildings as the city of Toronto. That is the main way that we're going to decarbonize everything. So we have shown them. We actively have, I think it's weekly, we talk with Toronto Hydro about various pieces, and then with the ISO as well, to keep pushing them to go a little bit further and say what our requirements will be for the future. But really what we found is there's not really going to be a silver bullet in terms of this. It's not carbon capture. It's not only electrification. It's not only. Really what we found is it's an this and this and this and this. We almost really can't turn down any possibility of building a low carbon future, because all of them need to happen and all at once. So we can't lean on just one thing and say we're putting all our eggs in that basket. We need to go down the roads and start down the roads, even if we don't have that certainty right at the end. And I think at the City of Toronto, we're really trying to push kind of the policies, the stick aspect, as well as the carrot aspect, where we build these programs in conjunction with putting in bylaws and policies and mandatory requirements, especially on the building side. There are other pieces with our electric vehicle strategy. There's other kind of pieces, but those are all the and pieces. Yeah, I think that's kind of the big pieces that I had there.
Are there other questions, comments? Anyone else from the panel like to step up on this, Matthew?
Well, one thing I've been thinking about a lot in recent months is, okay, so we talk about all, the Canadian Climate Institute, for example, that report, the big switch that they put out, I think it was in May, they said that the generation capacity in this country would need to grow by 2.2 to 3.4 times, I think, which is by 2050, which is an extraordinary number. And so I've been thinking, okay, what do actual system planners and utilities think about this? And so I spent quite a bit of time looking at some of their annual disclosures to see what their capital spending plans were. And I couldn't find a single utility that buys into that there's going to be a massive build out on the grid in the next decade or so. They all seem to be very inert. I'll just give an example. So Ontario Power Generation in this province, one of their major projects right now is refurbishing the Darlington facility. So they're taking existing reactors, and it's a huge project, very complex, and requires a ton of effort. But that is preserving existing capacity for future generations. And the same thing's happening at Bruce Power. They're investing, again, I think it's about $13 billion, a lot of money, just to keep what they have going. And OPG is actually retiring the Pickering facility. So, you know, what they seem to be focused on right now is preserving capacity. They're not announcing huge new generation projects. They don't even seem to be on the go right now. I guess the lone difference would be, I'd say, you know, they say they're going to build a small modular reactor at the Darlington facility. That'd be new 300 megawatts. But so is there a utility in this country that you think is actually preparing for that future that you envision with a much bigger grid, either on the generation side or the transmission side? It's huge capital spending. I just don't see it happening. So I'm wondering what you see.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you've said. And if you look at the history of electricity utility planning, basically all their forecasting is just simply taking a graph from the previous 20 years and extrapolating it forward 20 years. So they're notoriously terrible at planning the future. So that's a challenge. And that's why my point about they actually need to have net zero regulated into their planning function. Otherwise, they won't do it. To answer your question specifically, I think Hydro-Quebec is the only utility in the country that understands that this is more than just providing, you know, a commodity to customers. It's an economic development opportunity. It's a revenue opportunity. It's an export opportunity. And I think Hydro-Quebec is actually developing plans that will allow them to increase their supply considerably, as well as, you know, electrify end use. So. But I don't see it anywhere else in this country.
Okay,
maybe in that regard, to complement a bit what you just said, I think to me one of the key points is to make sure that we are all aligned, and the awareness was mentioned twice already. In the coming weeks, next month, by the way, I will meet with two CEOs of two big power utilities, among the biggest one in that country, not to convey any message, because I think they are fully aware of what they have to do, but also to explain them how we can participate to that dynamic. I mean, I'm just mentioning one example. We have a plant in Saskatchewan manufacturing power cables, medium voltage, low voltage for power utilities in Weyburn. And we are now building up a plan with a third party to operate a solar plant that will be connected to the grid of Saskatchewan, and for which not only we obviously we'll be happy to supply the cable, but we will connect our plant to that solar farm, so that together with the power utility, we become an actor playing the role not only as a supplier but also as an energy user. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, it's about that. It's about putting instances everywhere we can of how we are doing it by each of us as a key stakeholder. And it just comes to my mind. We have another plant in Fergus in Ontario where we are building up a battery system in order to avoid to rely on the grid and to pool energy at peak times where it is the most impacting, because this is where you have to start up a coal plant. And to avoid that, we during those at least 5 peak days, we will be off the grid and relying on the batteries. There are two motivations. Of course, there is an economical motivation, because you need that at the end of the day, whatever you do. And at the same time, there will be a positive impact on the climate, because hopefully, if we are more to do that, then we won't have to pull on and activate coal power plants.
Maybe according to you, Bruce, what is the main blocking point? Because I see some bad figures, plus 21% when we have to go to net zero. You are speaking about the fact that they don't, utilities, power utilities are not, I don't know if it is aware or if they take some net zero target and they don't deliver. What is the issue? Are they not aware, lost in their action plan? What, according to you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, the one, you know, I think if we look at, you know, the oil and gas industry, of course, they're in the business of producing and exporting oil and gas, and they want to do that as long as they can. So that's their motivation, and I understand that. And I think, just to be clear about my sort of my comments about Alberta, there are more people in Alberta that understand this more deeply than probably anyone else in the country, because this is so crucial to them. And if you look at great organizations like Alberta Innovates, the region of Edmonton, Calgary, I mean, a lot of fantastic stuff going on in Alberta. Where I think it gets tricky in terms of electrifying is, and without giving a big long answer, but because the Canadian economy for so many years is so rooted in resource development, and oil and gas now being the biggest resource, the entire structure of the economy, a famous economist, Harold Innis, wrote about this many years ago, really was designed around the development, support, export. And so even if you look up government structures federally, they're basically largely around the extraction and export of resources. That's kind of what Canada is inherently. So it makes it very difficult when the banks are in that business, the insurance companies are in that business. It's not just the oil industry, it's the Canadian economy that's behind it. So very, very hard to shift it. In terms of the specific barriers, I think I would say one particular thing with electricity is we need to get politicians out of running electricity systems. That's a big problem in this country, and we can't have every single province have its own politicians flipping every 4 years, making massive decisions about the future of capital expenditure that's on a 20-year time frame. It completely undermines anybody's confidence in the electricity system, adds massive cost, and I've seen it firsthand. And it doesn't matter which party. It's every party bringing their own ideology to managing electricity, which I know probably no one wants to get into the politics of all that today, but it's a problem in this country, and we have to somehow create these more independent, business-supported, expert-led, analytically driven exercises, so that we can get to what does net zero electricity really look like.
Yeah, it's a fair point, and actually interesting. I mentioned off the top that Alberta, alongside everything else going on there, is now the wind and solar heartland of Canada. And that is largely due to the fact that it does not have an old electricity monopoly sort of sitting on top of most of the grid. It's largely deregulated. It's simply quicker and easier to build out a large-scale wind farm or solar farm in Alberta than it is anywhere else in the country. As a friend of mine who works for one of these companies says, basically, the advantage in Alberta is the government doesn't get in your way. There's not a lot of encouragement necessarily going on. They just
Yeah.
don't try and stop it. So
Yeah, and of course, in the U.S., Texas, right,
great
has
example,
the largest solar and wind of any state in the U.S. They also had, massive power failures due to a completely deregulated market that didn't put in the safety requirements and, requirements on managing the system. So there's pros and cons to deregulation. So I'm a big fan of a well-regulated competitive market, which I'm in a minority on that, it seems.
Well, no, balance would be good. We are short on time on this topic, but I do want to offer the opportunity if anyone in the room has a question or comment that they would like to add. Do we have anyone? We have someone. Do I need to hand off the microphone? All right. All right.
And yes, this question is regarding the power grid. So if an aging grid is a central issue to improving overall efficiency of transmission, what is the current plan and timeline to improve the grid?
Well, that's the question of the day. And it is really the combination, the challenge that we have is this combination of an aging grid while needing to double the grid at the same time. So in that respect, it's like, doing everything that we have to improve and upgrade our existing systems. So it just makes it tougher. I think the question of, what's the plan? I think we need a plan, and I'm certainly working with a number of people in the electricity industry, everything from equipment suppliers, grid companies, the power companies. So there is, I guess, the positive note is being hopeful and an optimist, climate optimist, Chris. I think we've gotten to the point now that there is quite a recognition of the need to be thinking about these things. And I think more and more I'm in conversations with businesses and governments that recognize there's a need. So I think now the question just is, how quickly can we all get in rooms together, make these decisions, and understand how to get on with it?
All right. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for your input today. We'll invite you to take a seat and,
Thanks,
certainly
Chris.
carry on the conversation when we're finished up here. And I will move back over here and welcome our last speaker, but certainly not least this morning, Dr. Jose Echeverry. He is an expert in climate change mitigation, international and national renewable energy policies, and rural electrification at York University. He wears many hats at York, including associate professor in the Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change, director of the International Renewable Energy Academy, and co-chair of the Sustainable Energy Initiative. His work is currently focused on addressing the climate change crisis by developing an ecosystem of innovation both locally and internationally to provide practical opportunities for those interested in designing and implementing paradigm-shifting climate change solutions. He recently joined the Board of Governors and the Senate of York University, where he focuses on achieving a carbon-free university that can provide a world-class destination to enable learning by doing in pursuit of solutions to the climate change emergency. It is my pleasure to welcome as our final speaker this morning, Jose Echeverry.
Good morning, fellas. It's a pleasure to be here. Bonjour. Buenos dias, Bojo. As was stated, I'm going to speak not in my capacity as a governor of the university. My remarks are to do with solutions to the climate emergency. I don't need to take too much of your time on that topic. You've been to New York. You've heard our scientists. We are in deep trouble. So I'm going to use the 15 minutes that have been allocated to me to first speak about the geopolitics of energy. I think it's really important to speak about the geopolitics of energy, at least briefly. And we have esteemed journalists here, so that do a much better job than me on this, because they have the opportunity to expand on the written word, which is how these things have to be put into the public. It would be great if the people doing the audiovisual, if they could put not that photo of mine. That's what I looked like 10 days ago. And I'll get to you of why am I looking this way now. on the last 5 minutes of my presentation to you. So the picture that I would like is one of the panelists, so I can actually address you if you're okay on first name basis. So if the people in the audiovisual would be so kind to do that. So thank you, merci beaucoup. That's the one. And so geopolitics of energy, it's a fascinating topic, but it's one that in Europe has taken a new urgency, if I may put it like this. The juggernaut of war needs to be stopped. And Vladimir Putin needs to be named by first and last name, because what he has done to the human race, it's now reached genocidal levels. When you start threatening people to use nuclear weapons, you are in a very bad company, along with the likes of Adolf Hitler, and if we go back to the past, Caligula, to name a crazy person that burned their own people. So what is Europe doing about this? Well, we have the NATO treaty, thank goodness. So anything happens, Article 5 will kick in, and we will be defending Europe as Canadians will be there. I'm Canadian by choice, not by birth. So what is Germany doing? Deutschland is one of the big purchasers of the Bear's fossil fuels, and they will accelerate the Energiewende. The Energiewende is Germany's gift to the human race, how to reach to 100% renewable energy in a quick manner. I only have 5 minutes, so I can only touch upon this very briefly. But Germany has decided that we no longer can do the Energiewende on a marathon type of pace. We now need to sprint. And they've decided timelines that are ambitious, that will ensure that Deutschland can stop purchasing fossil fuel from Russia as soon as possible. And that is not a minute too soon. This decision should have been taken earlier in the 1990s when the Bundestag was dominated by people like Hermann Scheer that were trying to make this Energiewende a reality. Hermann now rests on the high heavens of maybe Valhalla or wherever we go next, those of us that are valiant warriors. But I don't know where he is, but I can tell you his legacy is upon us. We should have done it quicker, but the good news is that it can be done. Oliver pointed out some of the periodic table constraints. Thankfully, the European Union and the scientists there have been looking at this problem for a few years now. I know because I was in Berlin invited. We do every year a conference on the storage of renewable energy for 15 years, you see. So we were prepared for this. And I can tell you, don't worry too much. Those that are from Peru, Bolivia, and Chile, and you're looking at one that can claim origins on those three nations, we know that you need our lithium and you need our copper and you need, more importantly, the vigor of First Nations to actually open up the solutions to you. So don't you worry, we are connected. And that's my geopolitics on 5 minutes. I could expand, but some of you may want to come and do a PhD with me. I do take PhD students, a few only, because they take so long. Which leads me to the next part of my talk, what my great friend, which has been sat down there rather than up here, Dr. Laurie had a really good title. We know what to do. Let's make it happen, right? So we know what to do, he said. And then he asked for a vision. He said, what is the vision, you know? And then he nailed the copper of the conversation, which is, you say, human resources. So take it from somebody on the third largest university in Canada that sits doing the budgets. That's what governors we do. We just do budgets, big budgets of York University's is $1,200 million Canadian per year. And we had a surplus, by the way, because we're really good administrators. And also we have a pension fund and an endowment fund. We're not as wealthy as the University of Toronto, which, boy, do they have money to burn there. So why do I mention these things to you? Because PhDs, masters, and undergraduates are not going to get the problem solved of the human resource, let alone this huge resource constraint that we have, which is analogous, Olivier, to the concerns you put forward about copper. We got a problem here that the educational systems of the 20th century took a long time since the Universidad de Salamanca came up with the idea, or some other people came up with the idea even before that, of aggregating knowledge and sharing it through first word of mouth, the way First Nations, how we do it. Then Gutenberg apparently got the credit of the print. And then later on, the ARPANET, the internet, and here we are with social media where everybody's confused. Everybody's confused because information comes from all places. Some it's reputable, some it's garbage. And then wars are being now fought through misinformation. You got Russian spies creating, little trolls. And I'm not going to go there because that's not for today. The point of the story is if you want to have a human resource that can step to the climate emergency and solve it, you need to think outside of the box. Albert Einstein said it a long time ago. You cannot solve the problems that we're facing, and I paraphrase freely, of course, using the same rationale that created them. So we need to think outside of the box, ladies and gentlemen. And I didn't come here to be provocative. Those days are over. We need now to be collaborative. We need to find a medium ground where we all agree. Oliver, you're right. Copper is a constraint, and so is lithium and a few other illustrious members of the periodic table. That's a technical issue, geopolitical perhaps, commercial certainly. But the human resource problem, which is the big constraint here, it's actually a spiritual problem. I dare say that. Our people are broken everywhere. We're dealing with broken children that have been abandoned by their parents, because you need a driver's license to drive a car, but to have children, you just need a night of passion. And I'm not being facetious. We have children without thinking how we're going to raise them to be whole human beings. So how do you deal with this problem? And for that, I have 5 minutes to tell you how we deal with it. And now you know why I got a big beard of 10 days. 10 days ago, one of the most beautiful things in my life happened, which was I became the father of 14 children. Full grown, they arrived to me, 17 years of age, selected out of 1,000 children of the Chilean people and the Mapuche First Nation, from a little town in southern Chile called Payaco. Payaco, it's close to Futrono, and if you're lucky, you'll get to see one of our most beautiful spots on planet Earth. Well, these children came from the third solar school we built in Chile. People think I'm a Canadian professor, but I'm actually a builder of solar schools. That's what I do. Nobody knows because they don't bother to ask me, and I certainly don't have time to explain to people that don't want to listen. So a few years ago, Chile had nothing to do with solar photovoltaics or renewable energy. And even my own aunties used to say to me, Jose, you're wasting your time. You're like Don Quixote, going with the windmills and so on. I said, well, I learned in Canada a phrase from a prime minister that used to say, just watch me. So we built the first school in the northern part of the Chile because we're strategic on what we do. It's called Liceo Pablo Neruda, named after that very famous Chilean poet. beautiful poems, by the way. And that school is in Arica, in the border with Peru and Bolivia, because we put it there because we're strategic. We do things in a strategic manner. Then we moved to the south with the next grant from a very generous foundation that it's been funding our work. And we got better labs than you guys have here in Canada. And I've been to 48 countries, and I can tell you we got the best labs of all the 48 countries. And I've been to Germany, to Denmark, and pretty much every Scandinavian country. And that's why we have the best ones. Because we took everything that was good from the best places in the planet, and we put it right there in Chile. And 10 days ago, I shaved my beard, and I received these illustrious 14 young men and women. They landed in Pearson. I bought 18 Presto cards, and I went by bus, by subway, and by train to pick them up, so I knew how to do it, because I'm a lucky guy. I drive one of those 300 pounds of copper electric vehicles you were talking about. But they weren't going to fit in my electric car, nor would they communicate very well with it, because what I wanted to teach them was community-focused self-determination. So I gave each of them a Presto card, and we got in the train, and then we got in the subway, and I put them in the poshest hotel that you possibly can have at York University, where the people come to study in the School of Business. Because I wanted to take them from the poverty of southern Chile to the wealth of the planet, so they could feel good about themselves. But then I told them, do not get used to this posh place. After we ate good pizza, I say, what's coming next is you're gonna go through a portal that we have created in 70 Canuck Avenue. 70 Canuck Avenue. Doesn't get more Canadian than 70 Canuck Avenue. That is in Downsview Park, where we train the pilots, where we build the planes that help us win World War II. Yeah, that's why we chose that place. And there we grow food using sustainability strategies for 33 distinct communities, including my dear friends from Jamaica, which love something called callaloo. And we got so much callaloo now that I could feed all of you many times over. So the young people learn how to grow food. They build solar charging stations that we've designed locally with brands that I'm not going to tell you because people think I'm doing this for the money. I'm doing it to train the workforce. I got a plan, sir. Madam, I got a plan. And after that, we got them. We don't have yet electric buses, so we had to ferret them back in Teslas and, diesel buses to the lands of the Chippewa of Rama, which is one of the 3 Ojibwe tribes that are helping us in this. And we took them to the Black River Wilderness Camp. And if you allow me the last 20 seconds, because I can see the time there and I'm a respectful human being, I want to paint you the picture of these young people. So we're there in the Black River, learning the ways of our ancestors to reconnect to who we are. 10 of them did not know how to swim. So can you imagine my worry? I'm teaching them kayaking. So I slow it down. I had 3 kayaks, 1 that I pilot and 2 for each of the young people. And the first day, I taught 10 of them how to kayak. And the next day, I only had 4 left over because we were training them to be able to go to the next level of this journey. And I'm coming back with 2 of them, and what do I see? I see a rock with about 8 of them, and 2 and 3 of them swimming across with life jackets, and the 8 of them going, go, you can do it, you can do it. They were teaching themselves how to swim. You understand what that means for people that don't know how to swim? Then I knew what we were doing is the right way. I want to finish by telling you that this is a system that we're going to continue to offer to every nation of the planet. I don't have time to expand, but I hope we can talk about this at your leisure, because the way to do this is York University has signed an agreement with the United Nations Institute of Training and Research. It's based out of Switzerland, Geneva. UNITAR is an entity that does the training for all the United Nations. And we are now part of that. It's called CIFAL York, not CIFAL York University, but CIFAL York, because we want it in our new campus in Markham. And what we do there is curate the online education. I don't have time to explain to you what that means unless you work on public education. You won't know what I'm talking about. But basically, what has happened now is that we can make small little programs of 30 minutes, no, very short, because young people don't have the attention span that we have. They like TikTok. They like very quick things. So we can do short little movies with UNITAR and put them in the libraries of the planet. So professors like me can use them as resources, as books, but digital books that are fun with the best people. So they can prepare courses on climate solutions. And we're creating a vast palette using the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And then after they've been through the online education, we will be waiting for them in 70 Canuck Avenue to do the same thing that we did with these First Nation Chilean young people. Empower them so they can feel good about themselves first and foremost, and then learn how to work with each other. And I'm gonna say the same thing that I say to them at the beginning and at the end of the program. And please look to your left, and look to your right. Look to your right. And then look behind you, look behind you, look behind you. I'm inviting you to meet the people and look ahead of you. Those are the best people you're gonna meet in your life. So get their numbers, learn their stories, and collaborate to save the planet. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you, Jose, for sharing that story. It's I think a good reminder, and I certainly don't want to put any words in your mouth, but that there is, you mentioned empowerment. And when we talk about addressing climate change and we talk about big system change and that sort of thing, we often get, things get very lofty, and we talk about big long-term ambitious goals and big companies and the rest of it. But there also is this opportunity to correct some of the errors, perhaps, of the previous system. And as you were talking, I was thinking recently I did a bit of reporting on one of the interesting little side bits of the fact that Alberta has this renewable energy boom. And what we're finding in Alberta, as we found in a lot of communities across Canada, is that Indigenous communities are much keener to participate in this piece of the energy business than they were the previous parts of the energy business, which were largely sort of thrust upon them. So by way of example, the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation, which if you know it at all and you're not from Alberta, you would know as one of the First Nations that is frequently, they're literally located downstream from the large oil sands operations and are often seen, standing with celebrities like Neil Young and James Cameron, pushing back against oil sands development, while also being reliant on significant amounts of revenue from that industry, running oil sands service businesses and the rest of it, and have recently become very, very keen solar developers, starting with their own community and then realizing here's an opportunity. The Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation is now a solar developer in its own right in southern Alberta, which is a great story of, I think, a similar kind of or parallel kind of empowerment to what you're describing. Panel, I know, Aaron, you work a lot in renewable energy. Did you have some thoughts to add on this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Chris, I didn't see a question there. I saw a statement.
Yeah.
But you kind of juggled my memory about something that the organizers asked me to do. And if you give me 30 seconds, I think I can do it. You give me 30 seconds? I'm going to just step out. And how many of you have ever installed a solar photovoltaic system? So just a few of you. So what I did is I brought you the technology so you can hold it on your hands. So we're going to start very quickly because this is the First Nation way. It's a piece of museum equipment. This is a photovoltaic polycrystalline system. It's fully operational. It's one of the first ones that when I started, the sizes were such small. We measure the cost by watt when we're talking install. And back then, this used to be $77 a watt. And, you cannot even get polycrystalline no more. You can only get monocrystalline, right? But there you have it. It fits in your hands. It will work just like the big ones. And people ask me, well, talk about renewable energy. And of course I can talk about that, but instead, let me show you the state of the art. This is the state of the art of photovoltaics today. So I'll pass it around, please do not drop it. And secondly, do not touch it. Hold it like this and hold it into the light so you can see it. And I'm not gonna tell you the company, but I know the owners, of course. And you can get them in shades. You see how beautiful this can be? So I'll pass them around.
Gotta be careful. Huh?
Yeah, one of them. Because they're from a place that I won't be going to for a while. But I wanted to mention that to you because when you're working with First Nations, and I wanted to mention this to you, Chris, the people that have most installed capacity on a per capita basis in the world are not the Germans. I would say they're the 6 nations of the Grand River. And we need to talk about this, you and I, because maybe it is the Chippewas of Athabasca. But I can tell you the 6 nations of the Grand River have more wind and solar than most people in the planet. And First Nations, we have been in the tourism business for hundreds of years, right? We have the first tourists coming from Viking lands. Then we had that guy, Christopher Columbus, arrive. And we've been doing tourism with you for a long time. It didn't work out sometimes as well as we would like to, but I'm actually allowed by my elders, I'm a member of the Mapuche First Nation, to talk to you about our ancestral knowledge. And our ancestral knowledge, we closed it for a long time, all of us First Nations of this continent, due to the obvious reasons. However, we're now opening it up again, particularly to people like you that are communicators, that can tell the story that needs to be told. We're on this one all together. If we do not row on the same way, in the same direction, we're gonna all sink together because there are loose madmen like that Putin crazy man that is threatening, nuclear genocide. So we need to start saying, okay, we got only one planet here. What is it gonna take to keep it whole? And we're willing to give it all because we've always said to you, that's our ways. Thank you.
Aaron, you were going to. Sorry.
Yeah, I just actually want to lean in on the people empowerment side of your message because yes, for my consulting work, there's a lot of decarbonization that's happening, and getting our clients to understand it and take action is very important. But even on a grassroots level, we haven't mentioned it, but I also run a nonprofit called Impact Zero. I founded it in 2020, and what we've been doing is like getting people to get from a place of like a lot of passion but disempowerment, right? There are lots of people in this room that probably want to do a lot of really great work, but they have to have their job that might or might not be aligned. They have kids to handle, they have like low energy levels. Like there's a lot of reasons why people don't participate in coming up and implementing climate solutions. So the people empowerment side of what we do at the nonprofit is really interesting because we help people overcome those barriers, and the results that we've been able to see just under 2 or 3 years of operation, we've stood up like 6 or 7, different circular systems in the city of Toronto. So I really appreciate your angle of the people empowerment, whether you're talking about people in the community or business people. So I'm just curious if you wanted to speak a little bit more on the impact of empowering people within companies, of course, but also empowering community members to engage with, whether it's government or private entities, like it's all of us doing this together, right?
So the strategy is really, really simple, 200 to the power of 14. It's a big number. There's 200 nations, and those 14 that we got here are 1 out of 200 nations. If we continue to do the training, and we will continue to do it, because that is our strategy. People like it, fine. People don't like it, fine. If we're wrong, so what? No big deal. People got emancipated, empowered, and they feel good about themselves. If we're wrong, oh well, the co-benefits are good enough and justify doing it. But if we're right, and we are right, because we know what we're missing now, it's a network of people worldwide that are la creme de la creme de la creme, and talk to each other without having to be constrained by the constraints that constrain the human race. We will, in 1, 2, 3 years, reach worldwide proportions. And I'm stopping being a professor in April of 2023 to write screenplays so I can make movies for Netflix. I already do them for the Spanish speaking part of the world because I've been commanded by our elders. I have elder permission to do what I'm doing. And as a tenured professor, I told my dean, do I have academic freedom? And she said, yep. And I have a sabbatical coming up April 2023 to 2024. So to answer your question, the solution here, at least for us, is to bypass all the nonsense that constrains most people and start creating these new groups of young people. I wish we could do 100 at the time rather than 14. But we're set up to do 14 at the time, and that's the beard, right? Each little white hair you see was something that we had to fix to make it happen. But we are being supported by such amazing local people that I will tell you that I feel very happy to be here with you. Tamara knows where I came from and where I'm going today. I just came out of a very important sacred ceremony that we First Nations are having north of you here. And I talk to the elders and say, what do I do? I mean, do I break my fast and come to you? And they say, you gotta go. You gotta go. There's a reason why people invited you to talk here. And then I heard you, Jerome, if I can call you that.
Please.
You can call me Jose, thank you.
Thank you.
And I heard Jerome, and he was one point that we agree 100%. Second point that we agree 100%. And then you pose a question, is it doable? And I'm here to tell you, not only it's doable, but it's imperative that we get it done. And take it from a guy that it's been at it since 1990 something. I was in COP1 and worked with Global Environment Facility in 1991 in Washington, DC, on productive uses of renewable energy. Best job I've ever had. Wish I had stayed there. No, it was a training to get to this podium to tell you with all certainty, do I know exactly how we're gonna do it? No, but do I have a clear idea of how we can achieve it on a 5-year time frame, which is all we have left, by the way. If I'm wrong, oh well. You know, we'll find resilient spots where you're gonna be welcome if you were a partner, because we got resiliency spots. I told you we've been in the tourism business for 500 years, and we only show you the stuff that we wanted you to see. Our best spots are only for those that are invited to see them. And that's not an exclusionary thing. It's a carrying capacity thing, right? 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds. Thank you so much. I wish you all well.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Echeverri. Thank you to all of the panel. What we are going to do now is, let me check my notes. Wanted to just say thank you to everyone who came this morning. We are going to pass things off now to Jérôme Leroy for some final observations, tying things a little bit together, and before we carry on the conversation, amongst ourselves.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. Jose, don't forget that. We don't want to break that. And it is as precious as what you shared with us. Thank you very much. That was very inspiring, very inspiring. And I think, I've got, I took many notes, and I was supported by other notes coming from some of you. I don't know where I should start and where it finishes. I guess it doesn't finish today. So I'm only going to share some of the very thoughtful words that I heard. There is something I like very much with what Jose mentioned, is that regarding those 14 young lads coming from First Nation community and stating that we have to learn how to swim. And I think that is probably a very good way to summarize where we stand today. We need to learn how to swim in that new world, which is made of how we electrify that world in a way that we've not been doing so far, with which means and with whom. So it's certainly a way to learn how to swim. And I think with what we've learned today, I would like first to thank you, all the speakers. Thank you very much. The panelists, thank you very much. And you, our guest, your thought, expertise, questions, and comments have truly made this the conversation we sought. For me, there are many takeaways from today. It was the right choice to host this event in Toronto. This is the largest city in Canada and in the second largest province. Other cities and regions are faced with the same challenges and have the same concerns and successes. It's an important reminder that regardless of where we live and work, we are never just one actor or one individual. Tackling climate change is an active process that involves all of us right here in this room and watching on live stream. That's what climate change is about. Among the different notes I've been taking, I'd like to quote some of you, and starting with Chris, who mentioned that he's a climate optimist. I think if we are all here today, it's because we are all climate optimists. We believe that we have a big challenge ahead of us, but we can deal with it. And Chris called for the big switch, nice way of putting it, because this will power Canada's future prosperity. I think we have to give some meanings, but it has to be meaningful for us as human beings in our daily life as well. And here we've got both. So here in Canada, we have a very old grid, sometimes more than 100 years. So we know what to do. We learned a lot today. We also heard from Olivier that the consumption is going sky high from 25 metric tons to 35. And that's beyond our extraction capacity. So how do we get out of that? We need to think of new solutions. One is recycling. That will cover part of the gap, but already 50% of it. And it's Duncan from the City of Toronto say one of the key parts is the messaging. And I think this is very true. We heard that words in different ways: messaging, awareness, collaborative. And I think that's the purpose of today. Carbon neutrality. Bruce mentioned that the net zero changes to keep global warming below plus 2 degrees. This is what we want to do. Where do we stand today? We learned that Canada is not meeting its targets. It's already plus 21% when we should be negative. So electricity is a solution to the climate change. When we are building buildings, when we are retrofitting them. So this will take us for a while, up to 2,100. And we need to double the current efficiency. Awareness, again, is critical. Last but not least, like Jose started with, we are certainly in deep, deep troubles, but we found out that we have great ideas. And we know that we can make it happen. So, like one of the quotes Jose mentioned, just watch me, I think is a good way. We should all think about making sure that we lead by example, whatever we are doing. In the coming days and weeks, we will circulate these takeaways so that you can have them all in one place. It's my hope that these key takeaways can fit into a larger framework or strategy to take us forward, because we are going to change the current into an annual event. We want you to come back every year so we can keep each other accountable and check in on our goals and achievements. So not your benchmark, and set or recalibrate your goals and objectives based on what you have heard here today. So back to the framework or strategy. We will help. We will identify the steps you might need, items we have learned since getting our own net zero targets. We hope you can take this roadmap so it can guide you year after year. Nexans has many industry partners, suppliers, and customers around the world. And some of you are present today, and I thank them for that. You are all representing the ecosystem, and today partnership is key to succeed. We learned that many ways. So we are calling on all of you to join us as we act together to address the climate emergency. And we can do it by focusing more on the circular economy, recycling, carbon neutrality, and renewable energy. Thank you very much. So I think we are done now. And for the one being present, we can enjoy a nice cup of coffee. And I would welcome opening discussion with all of you. Thank you.
I believe over this way, there will be a formal media Q&A shortly. But otherwise, please carry on the conversation.